Okay, in this lesson we're going to take a look at the outbox, but first of all let's see where we're currently at. And if we take a look at our databases and we take a look at the auctions database, then we've probably got data inconsistency as it is right now. If I take a look and select the top 1000 rows and see how many results I have 14 rows returned in my Postgres database. If I take a look at the MongoDB database and refresh the items, then I've currently got 12 documents inside there. So I've already got data inconsistency before we set up the service bus, then obviously I've created an auction before that happened. So what I'm going to do first of all, just to make it very easy to see if there's data inconsistency, I'm just going to use Docker Compose down just so that I clear out the current contents of the databases. And then once they've stopped, I'm just going to run Docker Compose up again, check the databases both have 10 items in after I restart things for this little example, because I just want to make it as clear as possible what is really happening. And then I'm just going to restart the auction service, and I'm also going to restart the search service and make sure that both of these databases have 10 items inside them. So if I go back and I refresh the item and view documents, or refresh and then I've got 10 documents in there, and what I should find is that for my auctions, if I refresh this one as well, and then in the auctions I select the top 1000, then we've got 10 rows returned there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head over to Docker. I'm just going to stop RabbitMQ, and this one typically takes a couple of seconds to stop. And once that has done, I'm going to attempt to create a new auction inside Postman. Now, this will start to make the request, but once we get to, and let's go back to the code, and don't save, and if I go back to the auction controller, once we get to this point, we're going to start running into problems because the service bus is down. Mass Transit has retry functionality built in, so it won't let our request finish once we have a line of code like this in, which is another reason to start looking at alternative options than the defaults for this. But let me try and create a new auction. So I'll click send, and then we seem to get stuck whilst we're sending the request. But what should have happened is that we've got down to this point, that worked, and we saved the new auction into our database. We've then taken care of mapping, but this is the point, and we don't need to fire up the debugger to find out if this is the problem. We know this is the problem because of what we've done. But what we'll find is if I check the top 1000 auctions now, is that I have 11 rows returned because the new auction was saved into the database. But if I take a look at MongoDB and I refresh, then of course it's still going to be stuck on 10 documents. And if I cancel this request, because it will just eventually time out, then we've effectively now got inconsistent data. So that's what we're going to deal with now and see how we can resolve this particular problem. So I'm just going to close these down, and we'll need to do a little bit of setup for this, and we also need an additional package inside our project as well. So I'm just going to open up the NuGet gallery, and we're going to look for Mass Transit, and we want .entity framework core. This is the one we need so that we can set up an outbox, because our outbox is going to persist the outbox to our database. And if the service bus is down when we try and deliver a message, then it's going to store that message in the outbox in our database. And then once the service bus is available, it's going to attempt to deliver that message to the service bus. So we need to install this package inside our auction service. And once we have that, we've got a bit more setup to do. And let's see. So we need to go to our program class inside the auction service. And we'll need to add a bit more configuration to Mass Transit here. So above the using RabbitMQ, we'll say X and add entity framework outbox, and we need to supply this with our auction DB context. and provide this with options. And we can specify a query delay, and we'll say time span from seconds, and I'm going to specify 10 seconds. If the service bus is available, the message will be delivered immediately, but if it's not, then every 10 seconds, because of this configuration, it's going to attempt to look inside our outbox and see if there's anything that hasn't been delivered yet once the service bus is available. And then we tell it which database we want to use, and we want to use Postgres. And by the way, this mass transit package, it doesn't have a SQL Server option. There is one for Postgres, and I think there is one for MongoDB as well. But the developers of mass transit this is a recent addition to mass transit, by the way. So we've only got Postgres and MongoDB at the moment, and the only one that's documented at the time of recording is Postgres. So if you are using SQL Server, now is the time, I'm afraid, if you want this functionality, to switch to using Postgres. I did try and encourage you at the beginning of the course, saying that there would be occasions where Postgres is needed. And then we're going to specify an option to use bus outbox. And that's the configuration we need in our program class. And we also need to update our DB context. So we're going to go to our auction DB context. And we need to override the onModelCreating method that comes from the DB context itself, the class we're deriving from. So we'll use protected override void onModelCreating, and we'll pass this a model builder called model builder, and we'll say base onModelCreating model builder. I don't think that's required, but I typically include it because there are very few occasions where this goes wrong if this is not included, although I haven't actually tested it without using this, so I'm going to put it in anyway. Once again, it doesn't do any harm. And I'm going to say model builder add inbox state entity, and I'm going to need to add the using statement for this and say using mass transit, and then we're going to say model builder add outbox message entity, and model builder and add outbox state entity, and we need all of these for this. And this is something we're going to need to create a new migration for, because it's going to add 3 tables into our database, and this is going to be responsible for our outbox functionality. So we'll open up the command line. We need to go to our auction service, and we'll need to stop our application from running, which is broken at the moment, of course, because our service bus is still down. But we're going to add a new migration, and we're going to say .NET EF migrations add, and I'll just give it a name of outbox, and we don't need to add any additional parameters. There's no reason this should fail. This should work. And it's gone ahead and added that particular migration. So let's go take a look. And if I take a look at Solution Explorer inside data for the auction service, in the migrations, we have a new migration that's been created, and it's for our outbox. And we can see what this is going to do. It's going to create a table for our inbox state with all of these columns. It's going to create a table for our outbox message, again, plenty of columns, and also a table for outbox state. And this is what mass transit needs to store our message that's waiting to be delivered to a service bus that's currently down. And then once it's up, based on our configuration in the program class, it's going to take a look in that outbox every 10 seconds and attempt to deliver the messages that are contained in there. So we also need to go back to our auctions controller and rearrange the code inside there. And what we currently have is, after our context save changes has taken place, we've currently got the publish event, but now we've added the outbox. This becomes part of our entity framework transaction, so we can now move this up effectively. And I'm going to move the mapping functionality above the save changes. And what's going to happen now is these are going to be treated like a transaction. And either they all work or none of them work. And that means that if we try and publish a message to our outbox, which is what's going to happen if the service bus is down. If that fails, then the whole transaction fails. If the service bus is up, then that's fine. We just publish our message and it carries on as it normally would and gets delivered to the bus. And we save the changes, and that's the reason why if one fails, they all fail, is because now we've got this code before the save changes, and because this is using Entity Framework, then it's part of the same transaction that we're saving to the database here. So let's test that theory anyway, and what I'll do, I'm just going to stop the application, and for the time being I'm just going to restart the bus, and I'm going to go back to the auction service, and I'm going to execute .NET Watch and press return, and make sure the application starts cleanly and it populates those new tables in our database. And if I go back to Postgres and I refresh the items, what we find is we've got additional tables now in our database, as we would expect based on that migration. Now if I try and repeat the behavior that I had before, and let's close the others, but I'm going to create another new auction. I'm going to stop the service bus, create another new auction, and we should get a successful request this time, even though the service bus is not running. So I'm going to stop RabbitMQ once again and go back to Postman. I'm going to attempt to create a new auction. This time we get the correct response back, the 201 created. We've created our new auction. The service bus is down, so we've got different behavior now. And if we go take a look at our Postgres database, what we'll find is that in one of these tables, we will have our message. Inside the outbox message, we've got our message that's waiting to be delivered to the queue. If we go and take a look at our terminal, then we'll find we've got an exception here because the service bus is down, but we're still executing code on this, and once again we see the exception. But every now and again we'll see that the query to our outbox is being executed to see if there's any messages that have not been delivered that could be delivered. So if we go back and we start our service bus, and by the way, because we've created this new auction and it's saved in our Postgres database but not in the MongoDB, if we attempt to get this item at the moment, then what we're going to get is no results. But if we restart the service bus, and let's go ahead and do that, and then go back to VS Code and take a look at the logs and scroll down, then once we have this, what we should see is a successful request afterwards, which means that it's taken the message from the outbox, delivered it to the bus, and what should happen now is that our search service has processed that message, and what we should see now, if we click this again, is we see the auction being created in the search service. So that's the outbox, and we've got that configured, and now we can use that for our messages. Phew! Okay, what we'll take a look at next is another kind of error, and what happens if the service bus is fine, but the message that's been delivered causes an exception.